Internet, the Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing a very short but very intense article written by Fairbairn titled Psychology as Prescribed and Proscribed Subjects. So, prescribed means fundamentally given, and proscribed means fundamentally forbidden. So, from the get-go, this article is very interesting. So, Fairbairn admits that this is somewhat of a controversial paper because it's going to be a defense of psychoanalysis in its academic dimension. Because at the time of Fairbairn, in the late 30s, psychoanalysis was kind of laughed at as considered something that was unscientific, baseless, and fundamentally kind of useless to psychology as a whole, which should detach itself from psychoanalysis and become a pure, pristine science. Well, for Fairbairn, he's going to rip into those arguments because fundamentally for him, this disdain couldn't be anything more than unscientific on its face. Because for Fairbairn, psychoanalysis explains so many phenomena which are unconscious, and unconscious that cannot be tested in a laboratory. So he challenges the psychologists to fundamentally think outside of their labs, to say there exists more than what you can test for in laboratories. And what are you going to do when you're confronted with hatred, disgust, despair? You can't test those per se in labs, not on humans. And even in animals, it's debatable. He doesn't talk about animals, but that's me adding in my thinking. So he's going to very, very firmly instate that rejecting psychoanalysis because it's unscientific is unscientific itself, which is very true. Because if you're just going to reject something on the face of it, or just because you think that it's something, well, you're not doing science. Science is going to the very core of phenomena and trying to find hypotheses to explain what is happening. And that's what Fairbairn is on about. Is a psychoanalysis, for all its flaws, still makes an earnest attempt to explain phenomena. Phenomena that's not well explained by other areas of psychology. And even at that time, there's a lot of sins of human nature that remain unexplored. And for him, that argument of non-science or bad science, behind it lurks a much deeper argument, which is something of disavowal of the darker sides of human nature. Because, as we all know, what psychoanalysis does is that it investigates aggression and sexuality, two main forces in the human mind. Well, those forces can be very, very somber and very ténébreux, we'll say in French, meaning dark and almost pitch black. And those elements often make us feel fair, make us feel that we shouldn't go down that way because we might lose ourselves. And to this extent, maybe the people who proscribed psychoanalysis are afraid that it might lead people to believe and to understand things about themselves, which would then lead them to act on those instincts, so to speak, or on those drives. So therefore there is a real danger for those people in teaching psychoanalysis, because as they teach psychoanalysis, people become more self-aware, and that self-awareness translates at its core to a better understanding of the drives. But what is fundamentally fair is that the defenses that culture has built, because that's what Fairbairn explains, is that culture, civilization, is no more a defense than the individual's sense of identity has to defend against the unconscious mind. Well, the whole of civilization has to do that, and cultures have to do that, each in their own way. And how Great Britain in the late 1930s, felt that psychoanalysis had to be repressed because that knowledge was inherently dangerous. But what Fairbairn points out is that knowledge can help us understand. It's not because you understand that you're going to act on it. For example, his parallel is with other sciences, including physics, chemistry, and so on and so forth. And he says that those things have brought tremendous good, but also tremendous bad. And he gives the example of basically gas used in the First World War, and how that brought a lot of disasters, but also how science brought the breathing masks, which allow people to survive. So it's really a mixed bag, but he wants us readers to understand that science is a mixed bag for humanity. It's not a clear-cut beneficial aspect as we always think, because it's true that humanity has progressed tremendously and has gone beyond his primal condition. But for Fairbairn, it is a mixed blessing, because there's also nowadays, and even in the 30s, a real tendency to be able to destroy ourselves with science. So it doesn't take away from the dangerosity of science. And psychoanalysis is trying to understand that dangerosity through the lens of aggression, through the lens of drives. And that's really what people are afraid of, is to understand that at its core, human nature has a bad element. And that bad element is hard to cope with, because once you've said that, you also have to look within yourself to find the bad elements and to accept that you're not better than anyone else. You're just the same. We, every single one of us, myself included, of course, have bad negative traits, self-destructive traits, and then you have to confront them. So for him, that can be a hard sell, which means that behind that idea of science and psychoanalysis being unscientific, we reject everything with it, the drives, the badness, the guilt, and so on and so forth. All of that has no bearings on the purity of science. But, and this is the big but, the problem with that is that when you eject a discipline so fundamental in the deconstruction of ourselves, our identity, of trying to understand, well, you're going to deprive yourself of ways of coping with what is happening. And for him, he does give the example of the Nazis and how the Nazis proscribed psychoanalysis. Of course, we don't know. Well, fundamentally, the Nazis felt that it was Jewish science and that it had nothing to do with Aryans. By doing that, they completely destroyed psychoanalysis on an academic level. And Fairbairn, feels that that has prevented psychoanalysis and even humanity to go forward in the understanding of phenomena. And what is very interesting is that for him, there is a list of prescribed subjects that are good, should be taught, should be pointed out, and a list of proscribed ones which are forbidden. And in that list of forbidden, there is psychoanalysis, meaning that psychoanalysis, what I found interesting in the article is that even today, it's very true that psychoanalysis is kind of forbidden in universities, or mocked at, or looked at a strange way. But when we think about it, we wouldn't think about that of sociology, of anthropology, whereas they also have the aim of deconstructing what is the phenomena. Even if their theories are flawed or not perfect, we still accept them at an academic level, at a level in which fundamentally there is an ideology, and he pointed out, of positivism, meaning that it can only go better and better, or that we just need to be objective and then everything will be fine. But in that objectivity, we also deny all of the wrongness within ourselves, all of the badness of ourselves and of humanity collectively, because that's not to be forgotten. And from Fairbairn, there's a real risk in not taking that into account. The risk being for those phenomena to engulf the society as a whole, because it's not because you don't analyze something that it's not happening. And I think that that's something that's a very poignant argument, because fundamentally, sins are always happening in our minds. It's not because we're not analyzing them that they're not occurring. And analysis on the individual level helps people understand those mechanisms and helps them better deal with them. It's not perfect, but it's helpful. And the fact of it being helpful for society is also something that I think is very true. For example, one can think about the sexual revolution. It is very hard to say if the sexual revolution would have occurred without the introspection given by psychoanalysis and the dimension that psychoanalysis put forward within sexuality. And that's something that I find very interesting. He doesn't talk about the sexual revolution, that's me, but I'm trying to enhance his arguments to the modern day. And even nowadays, I really feel that psychoanalysis, more than ever, has a role to play in all of this, because sociology has regained a lot of strength, and that's wonderful. But psychoanalysis has been left behind, and should not, because it has a lot of good things to bring through the lens of destructivity and of aggression of sexuality. And I think that these things, once they're reintegrated into the mainframe of academia, can help everyone in other disciplines to understand. And I also think that it would help psychoanalysis be reintegrated if it could have a new polish in a way, because it's true that it's nowadays considered a bit of a passé discipline, whereas there's still a lot of very good work being done, very contemporary work. Of course, Fairbairn doesn't talk about all of this. What he says is that fundamentally, all these sins about the badness of man being rejected used to be confronted a long time ago by people who were religious, that fundamentally they had to deal with it, and that when they basically faded in culture, that role happened to go to other people. But it's always been important to confront those bad elements, because those bad elements, if let wild, can ravage a system, a family, a society even. And that's something that I find very, very interesting. So this article, for me at least, is the best defense of psychoanalysis I've ever read, because it kind of addresses the scientific nature of it, because it is still a methodology, even though it's flawed, even though it's not perfect. It still helps people, it's still useful. People who say that psychoanalysis is unscientific or useless are wrong. On the question of science, I would say that it's quite complicated, my own opinion being very nuanced on the subject, but its usefulness, I'm completely sure about it. I have seen it, I've experienced it, and I've prescribed it, so to speak, to patients. And I've given treatment in that way, and I'm convinced that it works. And data shows that. So those that say that it's useless even nowadays are just objectively wrong and unscientific. And I think that that's something that needs to be always emphasized, as Fairbairn emphasizes it, that psychoanalysis is of interest. If you just push a bit beyond the, cliches, you'll find a world of incredibleness waiting for you and waiting for you to think about it. So that's pretty much my review, which kind of went on a tangent at the end, but I feel that was a good and happy tangent. So if there's anything you want to ask or anything you'd like to add, feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.